Welcome everyone to the next installment of the PMP podcast. Today I'm joined by Ruth Utnage, and who was a participant of the PMP and is now recently released, I think a week and a half ago.
Yeah, 2 weeks today.
2 weeks today. All right, yeah, two week anniversary. So a celebratory podcast, and is now getting involved on the organizational end of the PMP. So before we jump into things, though, I just want to let everyone know that at this point in time, the PMP is experiencing something we've never happened before. We have a wait list of mentors. So for a long time, we've sort of had the opposite problem. There's a lot of people needing mentors, and there just haven't been enough. Now we have the opposite problem, which is fantastic. But in order to help resolve that problem, one of the things we're looking to do is to expand to Canada. So if anyone watching this either personally has or knows someone that might have some sort of connection to education in correctional facilities in Canada, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'll put my PMP address in the description below, or leave a comment. Let's get the word out there, because we need to start advertising the PMP to people in Canadian prisons and expand our reach. So please get in touch with us about that. But anyways, now it's time to jump into the conversation. So how's it going today? How's your 2 week anniversary?
Well, there's so much for me to adapt to. I was incarcerated for 11 years consecutive, and when I came out, there were so many new rules and laws and ways of doing things that have previously weren't done before. So I'm learning to navigate some of those differences. Like one of them, I wasn't released with any kind of identification, so I have to navigate that process. And for Washington State and the United States here, it's they had this new process where they outsourced these different aspects of licensing. So if I want to get just my license or some form of identification, then I go to the DOL, the Department of Licensing. But if I have to renew my license, which is what I have to do and take the test, I have to go to this outsourced thing. So that was never like that before, I felt, and now it is. So I have to navigate those things, which is great. It's all fun. And then of course, technology has just grown exponentially. And this is only my second time ever using Zoom. And when I went to prison in the first place, Zoom was something that was used for like maybe meetings, and it was kind of talked a little bit about, but it wasn't really a thing. So now here I am, and I have a phone that I can check my email on, which is brand new. And then, of course, there's the transitional side that I went in identifying as a male, and I'm leaving identifying as a female. And so there's a lot of new experiences in that regard as well, where I had to learn to shop for the first time for like women's clothes, and learn to apply on makeup that I didn't make or acquire while I was in prison. And so yeah, it's been really exciting. I've had a lot of fun.
Wow. So I guess I didn't fully make that connection, that you actually transitioned while you were in prison.
Yeah, I did. And it wasn't easy. When I first went to prison, one of the first things that was said to me by one of the prison staff was, if you're identifying as a female, because I told them I feel like I'm a woman. And they're like, all right, that's great. So this is what you do. You go back out to the population, you find yourself a prison daddy, and you stick by him, because we can't keep you safe. If you tell me that, then we're gonna have to keep you safe by keeping you locked away. And so for me, it was kind of like, I don't like, neither one of those options sounded good to me at the time. So I decided that I was just gonna identify as gay. I don't mean to say that as like just, but because it's no less or no more or anything like that. It was this thing that I decided to do for safety reasons. But
Right.
as time went on and as I found myself, I realized that I think I can navigate this environment pretty safely, identifying the way that I'm gonna want to. And part of the driver behind that was that I had lived in so long for other people's expectations and somebody else's idea of my ideal sense of self, that when I went to prison, I lost basically everybody. And the way that I kind of thought about it was, I'd rather, and this is actually coming from a Five Finger Death Punch song, Never Enough. I heard these lyrics and on the song he says, I'd rather you hate me for everything that I am than ever love me for something that I'm not. And I have to say, I kind of lived my life from that moment on, just like that, where I'm gonna have to present as me, because not presenting as me got me into a really, really, really bad situation. And it really led to some really poor choices. And I don't ever want to go back to that. That's a dangerous spot for me. So I'd much rather do this. And that took a lot of time and a lot of self-understanding and a lot of support. And I was lucky enough that while I was incarcerated, I ran into a lot of really good people. I ran into an organization that had a group of attorneys that was willing to help me, as well as a lot of other girls and men and women, I should say. And so we were really fortunate that way. And so I didn't just transition by myself. I transitioned with really all both inside and outside of incarceration.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, I guess that was going to be my next question about like finding that community within there that, you know, where you could to help give you that support to transition while you're in there, about how that came about. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, so, it's kind of
sorry.
It's kind of interesting, the kind of people that I ran into while I was incarcerated. When I first fell and when I first came out, I really tried to stick to the LGBTQ community. And I had done my work, my own advocacy, my own, I guess you could say, activism. And I was trying to stick with just those types of people. But as time went on and as I experienced more people, I realized that some of my biggest advocates and supporters weren't LGBT at all. Or if they were on the fringe. They stayed outside of that circle of people, and they associated with this large dynamic group of people that included everybody from all walks of life. As you may know, prison is largely segregated, self-segregated now. Some places it's sort of administered, but in some places it's not. And in Washington State, most of the prisons there, they aren't as segregated as one might think or see on TV. So, but with that territory comes LGBT segregation. Like, we'll segregate ourselves into this little demographic of people. Well, over time, I realized I didn't have to do that. And some of the best people that I know don't belong to that demographic as it's defined. And so I have this eclectic group of people and supporters and it's mutually beneficial. I support them as well in their endeavors. And it's really led to some really cool relationships. That's how I met Christopher Havens and many, many others that do the same kind of self-work that many of us really got ourselves involved with there. So it wouldn't have been possible without those types of those types of relationships with. And I have to say that prison for me wasn't, I don't regret going to prison. I regret doing what I did to get to prison. But prison for me was a spot that I could find myself. And I needed to be able to do that. And I'm thankful for the opportunity. I wish that I didn't take prison to get me to that point, but I'm thankful for the opportunity to meet the people that I've met. For instance, I wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation with you had I not gone to prison.
Right. So that journey then of uh, of self-improvement, of rediscovery, of learning. When did that start? Like I'm imagining, perhaps day one in prison, or perhaps were you right away motivated that you were going to make some changes from day one, or was it like slowly as you met sort of these people who had this mindset? Like how did that evolve?
Well, I guess the first time that I realized that I wanted to do something different was, oh man, there's so many little moments. I guess I wish I could point it back to like one specific moment, one turning event, but there's a few that really caught my attention. One of them was understanding that I had lost everybody. And that was one. And I began to do the typical prison stuff. I wanted to get tattoos, and I wanted to be mouthy, and I thought that I had to be, tough. And so I was trying to compensate for being openly gay at that point. And so I tried to be like a little tougher, and I worked out a lot, and I just put on that whole persona. And there was this older gentleman who had been in for a while, and he pulled me up and he says, listen, prison is a womb or a tomb. You can come here and you can learn to live, or you can finish dying. But you have to choose, because if you don't, you should know that the choice has already been made for you. And that really struck me, because it let me know that in this moment, at that time, in that space, I had a decision that I had to make. I had to choose if I wanted to live or die, or if I wanted to be better or not, if I wanted to try to make it through this whole thing with a positive outcome or not. And I had lost so much up to that point due to my own actions that I wanted to do something to reclaim that. And that was one of the biggest defining moments early on. And that was within the first 6 months of me falling. It didn't quite register with me until I started taking self-help programs, and really just out of boredom and wanting to connect with people. And I would say probably 4 years into my sentence was when I really started to take things seriously. And when I started my transitional process and really coming out to everybody around me at another institution, because I went to 4 institutions when I first fell. I mean, I'm sorry, throughout my entire incarceration, I was at 4 different institutions. And it was at my second institution that I really began to feel the pressure of isolation and not being associated with many people, and sort of feeling alone, and really wanting to come out and just be my truest sense of self. And by that point, I was about halfway through my sentence. So I guess those are the main things. It was just a matter of time,
Right.
And
letting those seeds, those ideas be planted, and then
yeah, and lots of mistakes. I'll be honest, there was lots of mistakes along the way. I said things that weren't always the best, and I did things that weren't always the best. I hurt people along the way, and while back then I would say that I was trying my hardest, to be honest, I just really wasn't. And it wasn't until I knew that I could do something different that I really began to take that hold. So one of those transitional moments was I felt really isolated in this new institution I had just been transferred to, and I had asked for help. I went to the COS, which is an acronym for Correctional Unit Supervisor. He's kind of like the one that's in charge. He's one of the few plainclothes prison employees. And I went to him and I said, listen, there's nobody here like me. I'm the only one that's gender nonconforming. I'm the only one that identifies like this. Everybody else is closeted. I need to go somewhere where there's more people like me. I need support. I'm afraid here. And his solution was to refer me to mental health. Actually, you don't need support. You need mental health. And So that was one of those moments where I realized that if I wanted something, I was going to have to do it on my own. So I started a website called lgbtqprisonsupport.com. And that was my first attempt to reach the outside community, which that site's no longer active. We transitioned to another site later on, a few years later, but that was my first experience of doing my own sort of self-advocacy. And it wasn't until I began to do my own self-advocacy that I realized that I could self-advocate, which then sparked a much larger and broader expansion of looking into myself and wanting to make some serious changes.
So just a quick side note for all the listeners, Ruth does have a currently active website, and I'll be putting that link below in the description of this video if anyone wants to check that out. So yeah, so that's interesting that I didn't realize that that's when you actually created your first site as a means to sort of create your own support. If I can ask though, just as a, this is kind of a tangential question, but so you mentioned that you've been in 4 different institutions, and I know some other people I've talked to have mentioned before, transitioning institutions, but this is actually not a thing I'm familiar with, in the sense that like, why does this happen? Like, it seems to me it's pretty typical for someone to transition to move between institutions a number of times throughout their sentence. So can you talk a little bit about that? Like, why that might happen?
Yeah, so there's a lot of factors for that. So Washington State has, I think, I want to say like 13 or 14 open correctional institutions of some variety. And we have different custody levels that we're assigned. That a lot of factors go into deciding what your custody level is. And you're assigned these points, and these points determine what custody you are. So an example is you have closed custody or maximum security custody, where you have more restrictions. Then you have medium, and then you have minimum custodies. And then you have camp, which you have to have X amount of years or less. Now it just got changed to 6 years or less. And then you have work release, or GRE, graduated reentry is what GRE stands for. And so there's lots of different things. And so some of us only have access to some of those prisons. We can't go to all of them. Somebody who's closed custody or maximum security can't go to a minimum security or a camp or whatever. So that's just kind of how the structure works. Well, because these prisons are all over Washington State, the first prison I was sent to was on the other side of the state from where my mom lived, which was my only source of support, which that was Airway Heights Correction Center. And that's in Airway Heights, really kind of on the Idaho border. Well, my mom lived all the way over in Puget Sound, and that's a long ways away. So when I first went there, I wanted to get closer to my mom, and the system sort of made a deal with me. They said, well, not just me, many people, they said, we'll let you go to this other institution that's closer to your mom if you take this program, which was Thinking for a Change, or T for C. And so I took that program, I completed it successfully. And then, as promised, they switched me institutions to another medium custody or long-term minimum facility called Stafford Creek Correction Center. Stafford Creek was my third institution. My first one was Shelton, was just a processing center. Everybody goes through Shelton, and then you get assigned what's known as a mother institution, which is the one that like you go to at first. When you first fall, you go to this institution. So I was assigned to Airway Heights, which is long-term minimum and medium custody. And then I transferred from there to Stafford Creek as a way to get closer to my family. And then other reasons why people may get switched facilities is they get promoted a custody level or demoted a custody level, meaning they did something bad, they did something good. Another reason, maybe there's some sort of facility need, like maybe a family member just got a job there, or somebody from a victim in your case has a family member that just went to prison too, and they showed up at the same institution that you're at. So one of you has to move. There's called a separation or a separate team.
Right.
So that's another reason. Another reason might be that you get assaulted and they can't have you there anymore. So that was a case for me when I went from one institution to my final institution, which is where I met Christopher with the PMP. I had undergone an assault and I was moved to a protective custody situation.
So was this the place where they told you didn't need support? Is that where the assault took place?
It is. It's
you don't need support, but you're gonna get assaulted and have to leave.
Right.
So if they had
That's
just
right.
listened to you that, hey, I need support in the first place, probably that wouldn't have taken place.
Well, sometimes you got to be careful what you ask for. I asked to go to that particular institution because I thought it would be better for me. And as soon as I got there, I realized, like, oh wow, this is not what I wanted. So it's definitely a case of be careful what you ask for. But the situation that transpired there, the assault that transpired wasn't. It was a shock to me. I didn't know that it was going to happen. I didn't see it coming. I still don't understand why it happened. And while I've gotten some information on it, none of it is satisfactory. That's going to say like, oh, that makes sense. Oh, I can see why you did that. But I guess it kind of goes back to like why we do our crimes in the first place is there's never going to be a good excuse for you to say, oh, that's why I assaulted this person, or that's why this person is now a victim. And you don't look at it and say, oh, well, that makes perfect sense. As much as we'd like to say that it makes sense, the fact of the matter is sometimes we do things and the reasoning behind them is not very good reasoning. And this is no different. So, but yeah, it is kind of ironic. That's the first time I've ever thought about that.
So we actually chatted a bit last week on the 1 week anniversary of your release. And one of the things we were talking about, and you touched about the on this earlier today, you mentioned making your own makeup. And more broadly, we were talking about some of the ingenuity that happens while you're there. So yeah, do you want to talk a little bit, because I found this very interesting last time. Do you want to talk about a little bit about prison ingenuity?
Yeah, well, you know what, I gotta tell you, when you don't have a knife or a grocery store or Amazon or a cell phone, you come up with ways to do these basic functions. And so so we do things to solve those problems. Prisoners are amazing problem solvers, and it's mainly because we're forced to be problem solvers. And so yeah, I've made makeup. Most people that identify as women in prison have. It's really quite simple. It's colored pencils, and you can break those down, and you can use the shavings from those to make like an ink of sorts, and it washes off fairly easily. Nowadays in Washington State prisons, they give us some makeup, but we still have to make some of that. So, for instance, a pencil works great as an eyeliner, especially when you get like drawing pencils and you have like a 9B. And when you have a 9B really dark pencil, that works great as an eyeliner. You just don't want to get it too far in your eye because it makes it turn red. But yeah, we do things like that. But some of the cooler stuff that I've seen is I watched a guy make a bird cage once, and he made this bird cage that was so realistic that when he went to go send it out, he actually got questioned. Like the facility came in and they're like, wait a minute, where did you get all this metal? And he's like, no, it's not metal. It's just toilet paper and wood glue and bars of soap and paint. I promise you that's all it is. But he made this thing, and it stood about 2.5 feet tall. It was the size of a regular bird cage, and he put a canary in there, and he put down newspaper, and he made faux droppings and food, and it was really quite impressive. And I've seen a lot of stuff just like that over the years. But
yeah, and I
think one of the,
you were telling me that he used bars of soap to make like molds for the bars. So
yeah,
he would like put a chain of bars of soap and then like press it, make an indent to make like the circular bar, and then use like the, I guess, paper mache out of toilet paper to craft the bars, right?
yeah. So he would carve in, and people do this to make like rubber stamps too, or not rubber stamps, but they do this to make stamps, like a print stamp, where you can carve into a bar of soap fairly easily. And so you just have to make that negative in the bar of soap. So that's what he did. He carved out a negative of these bars so they were all uniform, and then he pressed it in there. But people do it for hearts or a handprint or just whatever they want to create, a little skull, and they'll press it in there, and then they'll make another side to that, and then they'll paint. They'll put in their paper mache, and if you use like a wood glue or some other glue that dries really hard, you can get this almost resin, this dried resin that you can do a lot with. You can paint it. You can do a lot with it, and it's just kind of fun to watch. The ingenuity of it is really quite amazing. I've seen people make sculptures out of Jolly Ranchers that have been melted down. So I mean, it's there's a lot that happens. I'll tell you what, never underestimate the power of a spork or your idea. Yeah. I went probably 6 years only cutting up meat products with a spork and my ID.
You use the ID as the knife, I guess, basically.
Yeah. But I mean, it was, it was fun. I guess I shouldn't say it was fun. I know people that are incarcerated that get out are going to see that I said the thing about prison was fun. I mean, it was interesting. I talked about it quite often. So yeah, there's.
There is a certain sense. I think lots of people, whether they realize it or not, do like some sort of creative pursuit, right? Some sort of problem solving, and I think there is something to be said. Sometimes when you do have these restrictions, these limitations, like when I don't know, artists will, or a writer might try and work on some writing assignment, or an artist might try some piece where there's like some sort of challenge where there's some restriction on it. And sometimes it's when you have that restriction that it really breeds the ingenuity, right? You sort of strip a bunch of the fancy things away, and that promotes the creative part of your brain to really think, okay, how far can we actually stretch this very simple thing? So
and I think that same concept sort of gets applied to like self-improvement too. We're sort of told when you get to prison, you go there with the understanding that you're broken, that what you did was a result of your brokenness. And it's sort of you can sum it up by saying, you made your bed, now lay in it.
Right.
And that's a very confining way to think about correction, any kind of correction. If you tell a child, not that prisoners are children, because we're not, but if you tell a child, you made your bed, now lay in it, that doesn't actually offer the child any kind of solution for how not to do that again. They need to learn something.
Right.
And I think that adults that go to incarceration are no different, that they need to be given the tool to say, this is how you change this. And that's not going to look the same for everybody. So I think that when we're given these really confined correctional attitudes, or these very defined and confined programs that don't have a lot of complexity to the dynamics of the human psyche, it's kind of a one size fits all. We'll try to hit the 60 or 70%, and then the 40 that fall off, I guess, whatever. And it's inside of that space that the same creative applications apply. So you have people that are really good at drawing, you have people that are really good at sculpting, you have people that are really good at writing, people that are really good at speaking. Well, people have a lot of different gifts that sort of shine in those moments, like you were just saying, that we love to solve problems. And if you look at yourself as the problem and you take that seriously, then you start to come up with solutions that are out of the box thinking, especially once you realize that it's possible. When you see other people do these out of the box things, then you want to sort of do that for yourself. And that's the category that I fell in. I seen people doing things that I'm like, I didn't even know you could do that. I didn't even know that was an option. In fact, another defining moment for me was at the final institution I went to, which is at Monroe Correctional Center. I went to college. I got there to the prison, and I was still sort of scared from the previous experience. And one of my good friends now, at the time I didn't know him, I asked him for a job. I said, hey, I need to get a job doing something that's not in the unit. I just need to make some money. He says, well, why aren't you in school? I'm like, here we go. I don't know, man. It's school's not my thing. I got my GED when I was 16, and I'm not really, I read books. What do you want from me? And he's like, listen, I'll make a deal. And he goes, no weird stuff, all the garbage aside, I will pay you $10 a month to go to school. And I'm like, yeah, okay. I've seen this video before. I've seen this one. When you get to prison, they show you this video. It's called the Priya video. And there's a part in there where this new inmate shows up. He goes to his cell, and there's a candy bar in his pillow. And the video is showing you how to handle being given gifts in prison. And by the way, PREA stands for Prison Rape Elimination Act. It's a thing they do in the United States to try to help prevent prison rapes, making it mandatory that it has to be reported by staff. They can't overlook it. It has to be investigated. And so the video teaches you that when somebody tries to give you a gift, you're supposed to make sort of a public spectacle about giving it back, that you're not going to accept that.
Right.
So here I am in this situation. Been in prison for a while now. I've kind of been around the block. I'm starting to present as female, but not quite. I'm not telling people that. I just say I'm gender nonconforming. And they asked me, well, what does that mean? And I said, don't worry about it. I'm gay. Don't worry about it. And here's this, I'll pay you $10 a month to go to college. And I'm like, yeah, right. But a month later, I still hadn't got the things that I needed. So I went back to him sort of expecting that I was going to have to do something, expecting I was going to have to be a prostitute for this. And I said, okay, no, seriously, what do you want me to do for that money? Because I need things. I have to do this. And he goes, no, seriously, all I want you to do is sign up for college. That's it. I won't even talk to you. You give me a list for this amount of things, and I will provide it to you, and you go sign up for college. That's it. That's the deal. I won't even talk to you after that. So I was sort of waiting for the other shoe to drop on that, but I did get enrolled in college as a result of that. And I started sort of messing around in there. And there was this one teacher, I'll never forget her. Her name is Melissa McKay. She's beloved to my heart. And she read a paper that I had written for one of her classes. And she pulls me aside and she says, "You are really intelligent." And I think that was the first time I had heard that particular phrase from somebody speaking about me since I was a small child. And it wasn't like she just said it like, "Oh, you're really intelligent. By the way, come over here, little Johnny," type thing. It was more like she meant it. She had genuineness and heart behind what she was saying. And that sparked a whole nother side of me. That really brought out a lioness inside of me. I ended up graduating Edmonds Community College from inside prison with honors. I graduated with a perfect 4.0. I went on to take every educational course offered, to include computer programming, which I also graduated with honors and was inducted as a Phi Theta Kappa member, the Honor Society here. And they ended up awarding me my high school diploma in addition to my GED as this positive thing. So it was a good thing.
Wow, it's just, you know, it's these sequences of these moments, these moments that maybe to some people are little, but at the same time big, that, you know, it can have that profound impact that leads you down this this different path.
Yeah.
And so you know, you have this 4.0 GPA. You went through you know, with honors, graduated with honors while you're there. So the question is, what's the continuation now? What are your plans continuing this on the outside? How has this impacted you in your plans for the immediate future, or the even somewhat distant one?
Well, now my immediate goal is to get registered with the University of Washington. I want to get my undergraduate degree, and I've kind of been going back and forth, but mathematics is definitely going to be something that I look into. And then my ultimate long-term goal is I want a PhD. I want that. I can't explain to you the logic behind it. I don't think it's going to make me money. I don't think that it's going to do anything for me. I just want the satisfaction of knowing that I did this. I got a PhD. I want to do that. And what I get a PhD in I'm not all the way sure, but I know that it's probably going to involve some sort of sociology. I'm an absolute sociology nerd. I love it. And while I'm not as good at math, I love it nonetheless. Math for me, I've learned, is this very soothing, calming thing that I learned while I was in prison, thanks to Christopher and his what I call mathematical nonsense. He loves it. And I see that it's this beautiful thing between him and mathematics. And I discovered that same relationship as well. Just I'm not as good at it.
I mean, you know, okay, some people have some crazy abilities when they're very young, but no one comes out of the womb knowing anything about mathematics or being good at mathematics. The sort of key to getting good at it, step one, is you have to love it, right? If you don't love it, then yeah, you're not going to get good at it, because why would you bother getting good at something you don't, you know, really love? It's going to be very difficult to do that. But I think, you know, one thing that's interesting, we were talking the other day about, you know, different possibilities of where one could go with mathematics. And I think there's even some overlap in sociology. I mean, more specifically, statistics, right, is a really powerful tool, depending on the nature of sociological studies that you'd be carrying out there. But even there's things like network analysis. I know some people, there's actually some pretty technical math stuff has popped up in their work.
Yeah, I know. So I remember as a small child, I loved reading. And while my adoptive mother, I'm adopted, while my adoptive mother was somewhat supportive of that, she could only be as supportive as the environment that she was in. She was caught up in her own things that were deeply affecting for her, and like her own life's challenges, right? And so really paying attention to how well her child could read wasn't that big of a deal, but at least at that moment. But the educators that I was dealing with as a small child, they did take notice.
Mm.
And I read my first novel at the age of 7, and it was John Grisham's A Time to Kill.
Oh
And
wow, that's a
yeah,
pretty serious novel for a 7-year-old.
it is. And it wasn't like somebody was like, here, you should read this. It was, we were traveling between 2 states, my mother and I, almost every weekend,
Mm.
and got my toys one day. I had these toys that I would bring with me, and I had forgot them. And the drive between these 2 states was, I hated it. And
Mm.
I was a small child, and I would get easily. So the only thing left in that car was my mom, me, and this novel. So I crawled in the back and I picked it up, and she's like, you can try reading it, honey, but I don't think you're going to be able to understand it. And by the time we actually arrived at our destination, not only did I understand it, but I realized that my family was the bad guys in that movie. And I'm sorry, in that book, movie. But I realized that my family had a lot of those characteristics. Well, some of my family, I'll say, not all of them, but some of them had the characteristics of racism and that sort of unsavory character that some of the characters in that book had. And I had that real live conversation with them about that. That book really caused me a lot of strife with my family. And it was also because of that, when I became conscious that my family was racist, or some of my family was racist, and that racism was a thing. I didn't know that it was even a thing up to that point. I didn't know that hatred had a name. And that book really defined it for me. And then when I interacted with it with my family, I realized that it wasn't valued. Education wasn't valued the same way as these other things were. So for me, I took education and I pushed it down. I told myself actively, I'm not gonna deal with this, just like I did with my gender identity. I knew that there was something different about me at that age, but I knew that it wasn't acceptable to my family.
Right.
And then I learned that intelligence also at that time with some of my family wasn't accepted either. So I pushed those things off to the side and I just brushed them from my mind, and I spent the rest of my life until prison that way. And so when I came in and I had that experience with Melissa, it was this alarming, eye-opening, sort of soul-drawing experience. I remember I went back to my cell after that, and I cried uncontrollably for hours because I realized that I was at this moment where I could recapture part of that youth that I packed away a long time ago, that very best part of me. And that's also carried me through. So now I'm in this situation where I have all these possibilities, and actually now I have too many possibilities. I have too many directions I could go, right? I feel like I could do anything.
Well, that sort of comes back to what we were talking about before, that sometimes the restriction, breeding sort of that creative drive forward, the limitation of choices, and then now, the whole world's at your feet now in a way that it hasn't been for the last decade. Right.
Or previously,
Or
before I
previous.
went to, before I went to prison, things were very narrow for me. I was living a very narrow-minded life, and I was involved in very narrow-minded things. And I did things that were very selfish. Some would even argue narcissistic. And prison really offered, that confinement really offered me an opportunity to look inside myself and say, okay, what about me do I want to get rid of, and what do I want to keep, and what do I want to grow? So I took advantage of that. That's important to me. I'd like to touch on that part of it real quick, is that I think it's important to acknowledge that I went to prison because I did something. It's not because I was innocent. I really impacted lives. I there's a community of people that were touched by what I did, and not in a good way. They were, I mean, it was this very negative experience for a lot of people. And I don't want to diminish that in any way, shape, or form. And the only thing I know how to do is I can't undo what I've done. But what I can do is I can do everything I know how to take the resources that I have in this space, this body, and try to build a community that's better. And everything that I do now is towards that end. I cannot live in a world where I didn't try. Sorry, my phone just told me I have a low battery. I can't live in a world where I don't try to reconcile some of that, where I don't try to uplift and build. And I think that's really what I want to focus on. Whatever educational pursuits I do, whatever career pursuits I do, whatever professional relationships that I get involved in, which are many, I want to make sure that it all centers back to, is this loving? Is this promoting healing in the community? And is this honoring the second chance that I've been given? And I think that's really important, that for me to acknowledge that this is a second chance at life for me. And while there's somebody that's out there that doesn't get to just move on the same way that I do, and I think that I'm going to do the only thing I know how to honor that, which is live my life in love and with respect and with care, that I will not hurt somebody again, and that I only want to embrace the loving side of life. So whatever I do, I want it to be towards that end.
Well, I think that is a very impactful and purposeful statement, perhaps for us to leave off on, as we're at towards the end of the hour, and your phone is dying. So before before it completely shuts off, I just want to thank you again for chatting with me today. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, it absolutely has been a pleasure. Thank you so much. And I would love to do it again, and I'll answer any questions that come up. So yeah, feel free.
Certainly, yes. If people have questions that they want to ask, of course you can leave them in the comments on the video, and I'm sure we'll catch up again formally through the PMP podcast at some point, and put some of those questions forward to you. So yeah. Okay, thanks again.
Bye.